So with that, I turn it over.
Oh. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and talk about this book. This is the official book launch, so thank you, John Martin. And I thought that I would just talk a little bit about the book, why I wrote it, a little bit about the process. I might read a little bit and then open it up for discussion. So the book is called Daring Adventures, Helping Gender Diverse Kids and Their Families Thrive. And as you know, I have 3 children, the youngest of whom is transgender. Evan was always what we would call gender nonconforming. As soon as he had opinions about how to do his hair and what clothes to wear, he was rejecting anything that resembled girly stuff. And, you know, at the time, there's a lot of permission in our society for girls to be a little more gender fluid than boys, I think. And so and I don't fight about hair and clothes at all. Anyway, I say if it fits you and it's appropriate for the weather, you can wear whatever you want. But he was very clear in this expression, and later it became clear that this was really part of his identity. And he started saying things like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a man. I'm going to marry a woman. I'm going to cut my breasts off. And that started worrying us, right? Because we thought this is deeper than just the way that he wants to dress or the way that he wants to do his hair. This is really about who he knows himself to be. And very early on, when we were just sort of trying to figure this out and how to support him and hearing him, I asked him, I said, Evan, I didn't call him Evan at that time, but I said, sad that you were born a girl, because I was trying to figure out what the emotional piece of it was. And he said, yes, mommy, I told God when I was a star in the sky that I was a boy, but God made me a girl, and I just have to live with it now. And so I still hardly can tell that story without getting choked up, because he was 5 years old and he just knew who he was, and he knew who God made him to be. And so I said, honey, I don't think that God makes mistakes. And I think your body is just one part of who you are. And I think God made you just as you are. And that there are boys that were born girls and girls that were born boys. And those people are transgender, and maybe that's what you are. And he said, that's not true, mommy, that doesn't happen. And I said, it is. And so I realized that we knew transgender people. Jay Pryor was one of the first transgender people that I ever met. And I was so grateful that it was church that brought us together. But he didn't, you know, at 5 years old, he was unaware that this was a possibility for him. And so just in our journey to try to support Evan, to help him become his best, most vibrant, most beautiful self in the world, we started to know other parents who were on this journey. And I realized that our experience is not normative, right? Every parent, every family's journey with this is a little bit different, but there are some common threads in a lot of this experience as parents. And a lot of these parents, not all, but many of them are cisgender, heterosexual people like myself and Marcus. And, you know, we consider ourselves to be allies, but we don't really know what this experience is like firsthand. And so finding that community and finding those resources to really support Evan has been such a gift, really, to me. I've learned so much. I've met some incredible people. And when I started writing, I just started writing about our experience. It was really just journaling, because I didn't want to forget any of these things that we were experiencing and that I was learning. And pretty early on, I decided that this didn't need to be a memoir. There are plenty of memoirs of parents of transgender kids. There are plenty of memoirs of transgender people. And I actually think those are the ones that people should be writing. So there was really no need for another memoir. And my editor told me as much. And then initially after that, I thought, well, I'll write a book for church people, in part because church kids are growing up, transgender kids, gender diverse kids are growing up in churches, and churches need to understand and be able to be supportive. And my editor said, that's great. You know, you're a church person, you're a clergy person, you're a parent. But if you write this book for churches, clergy will buy one copy and it will sit on their shelves. So you should write this book for parents. And then you'll have a much broader audience, and those parents will take the book and they'll give it to their pastors and they'll give it to their friends and their extended family, and it'll have just a much greater reach and impact. And so that's what I did. And I realized I needed to also gather more stories, because again, our story is only one story. And so I interviewed about 20, 25 families of kids at different ages and stages, different parts of the country. I got connected to some of these families through a group in Chicago called Pinwheel Families, which meets at a church. And a colleague connected me there. And then I'm part of a secret Facebook support group for parents of gender diverse kids in the DMV. And just the network kept growing and the conversations kept happening. And so after doing all these interviews, I kind of pulled out the common threads and started writing, and then got stalled and wrote some more. And it took all in all about 4 years to write this book. And the last year has really been editing and getting it to a place where it was really ready to be out in the world. So I've never written a book before. I don't know that I'll ever write a book again. But that was the experience of writing it. So I just wanted to read a little bit, if that's okay. So this is from the introduction. Although it's not always been as visible as it is now, transgender and gender nonconforming people have been part of every culture and every community since, well, forever. In the past few years, gender diversity is starting to be more accepted in the world, albeit also more controversial in some circles. And transgender and non-binary young people are now much more visible in popular culture. They now have the space, the terminology, and the role models to help them live openly as their authentic selves. While transgender and non-binary people statistically make up less than 1% of the population in the United States, the highest percentage of individuals identifying as transgender and non-binary are currently between the ages of 13 and 17. And just when Evan read the introduction, he said, "Mom, you should have said how many people that is." Because 1% sounds like a small number, but he wanted you to know that that is, in numbers, that's a big number. So transgender and non-binary persons belong to every racial ethnic group, every class and geographic region, and this surprises many people, every religion and political persuasion. They are our neighbors and coworkers, friends and family members, and yes, our children. Religious and cultural differences can still make it more difficult for young people to come out, to recognize and affirm their gender identity. Being a Christian, for example, doesn't mean you can't or aren't or won't be transgender, but it can mean that your family and or your community may not as readily accept who you are. Being a Christian, especially if your experience of Christianity is more socially and theologically conservative, in fact, can lead to greater instances of rejection by parents, families, and faith communities who cannot reconcile their religious beliefs with a child's evolving gender identity. This rejection of gender diversity extends beyond family and interpersonal relationships too, as religiously based bigotry against transgender people has been enacted into law. In 2002, there were more than 300 bills introduced in 35 states across the nation that targeted transgender children, youth, and their families. These laws are largely backed by social conservatives, many of whom are evangelical and mainline Christians. The first laws in the country banning transgender girls and women from participating on female sports teams and preventing parents and medical professionals from treating transgender minors with gender-affirming medical care were passed in 2001 in my home state of Arkansas, a bastion of conservative Christianity. Yet at the same time, I have friends and colleagues from all over the country contacting me with increasing frequency or seeking support for another parent who's struggling with their child's gender questioning or transition. I am writing this book for those kids exploring their gender identity, especially the ones who live in communities that are not as open and affirming of gender diversity, and for those families with gender diverse kids looking for support, guidance, and hope that they and their kids are going to be okay. If you are reading this book, it is likely that you share my commitment to learning, growing, and creating more safe spaces where these kids and families will be welcomed with open arms and surrounded with the love and support they need and deserve. So I'll just read this one other part that explains why I named the book Daring Adventures. When Evan started to transition in first grade, he was already involved in Girl Scouts. His older brother, however, was a Cub Scout. As a daisy, Evan would go to meetings where the Girl Scouts sat in a circle and talked about things. They made friendship bracelets and sold cookies and went on short hikes, mostly along paved paths. But Graham's Cub Scout den went on campouts, where they built campfires and got dirty. They raced Pinewood derby cars and learned how to use a pocket knife. Evan told us one day that he didn't want to be a Girl Scout. He wanted to be a Boy Scout, he said, because the girls just sit around and talk about being friends. But the boys go on daring adventures. Now, as a Girl Scout leader myself, I knew this wasn't totally accurate. We had done some pretty fun and adventurous things with my older daughter's troop. But I got Evan's point. He wanted to do the things he saw boys doing and not the things that girls his age were doing. It was another way that he was trying to tell us, I'm a boy and not a girl. Since Evan started exploring his gender, our whole family has been on a daring adventure together. Embracing this journey as a new and exciting experience has helped us to stay open to the unexpected, invited us to learn and grow, and to come to understand how truly lucky we are. So I would be happy to take some questions.
Yeah, I like the way you ended that last one, how lucky we are, because a theme you keep pulling out of relationships you describe in the book is we are so lucky to have you as our son, as our daughter. We are so lucky. And there's even one case where, I think there's one case where the child now, a teen or preteen says, so lucky to have you, son. And it's very touching, very spot on.
Thank you. Yeah, I entitled one of the chapters, We're the Lucky Ones, or The Lucky Ones, because
Yes.
people would always say to us, oh, Evan is so lucky to have you as his parents. And I knew what they meant, that came from a place of understanding that not all parents are accepting and supportive of their kids. But I feel like we're the lucky ones because he's such an amazing person and we've learned so much by being his parents. And we are so lucky to live where we are, to have the resources we have and the support of our extended family and our community. Not every family has that, but then I make the point that these kids should not have to depend on luck to survive, right? That we need to be advocating and working for a more gender inclusive world in which it doesn't depend on being born into the right family or the right community or the right church. Team.
How has this whole experience changed your theology?
This-
Made a difference.
The experience of being the parent of a transgender child.
Yeah, whole experience, understanding the child's response, kind of thing you write about.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm asking you to repeat the question so people on Zoom.
Sure. So the question is, how has this whole experience changed my theology? Well, I would say that it hasn't really changed my theology, but it's confirmed what I already believe, which is that we, I think when I responded to Evan's expression that, he knew he was a boy, that God had, that when he was a star in the sky, right? That's how we used to talk about to the kids, oh, well, you were a star in the sky. Your soul existed before you were in body, and that God knows who you are, and that, it was Psalm 139, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Before I knit you together in your mother's womb, I knew you. And that I believe that God creates gender diversity. All that was and that's part of how the world and people are created. And that we're all a reflection of that Imago Dei, that image of God. So I think it's just confirmed for me. And I think the other thing that's confirmed for me is that as parents, and I think this is the hard part, we think we have so much control over our children and the way that they are shaped, and to be able to mold them and create them into the kind of people we are. And they come so much their own people. And I look at all three of my kids and they are all totally different. And I feel like we've been consistent in our parenting, or at least we've tried to be, and they are unique individuals.
Seems like a huge practical thing is bathrooms, and the fact that there aren't any such bathrooms, everything is boys, girls, and women. And then,
Not in DC though.
but the parents would have concerns about their boy going to the girls. They identify as a boy going to the girls' bathroom and vice versa. And it just seems like that's a huge obstacle, but DC is doing some good things.
Yeah, so Roger raises the concern about bathrooms and people of different genders using the same bathroom. And yeah, a couple of years ago, DC passed a law that places had to have gender neutral bathrooms. So if you go into a restaurant, most restaurants have either a single stall or they have doors that go from floor to ceiling. And in fact, a church that I worked with in Baltimore when I was doing fundraising stuff, they did a bathroom renovation in their social hall, and they just made one big bathroom with sinks in the middle and stalls around the edges with doors that go floor to ceiling. And so anybody can go in there, you just go, you do your business, you come out, you wash your hands.
Right.
And so, and I have a t-shirt that says, you can pee next to me. Because like, I don't feel threatened by people in the, like, you're going in to do your business, I'm doing mine, and we're just washing our hands together. And like, I think there's a lot that's just overblown about that.
Yeah.
And it's just transphobia, right? It's fear of things that's not real.
Yeah, but it just seems like the practical thing throughout the country that there are already these separate bathrooms. Do you think there's a movement for, really requiring in elementary schools, for example, to have?
Well, it's a capital cost, right? But I do think more and more as people are building new facilities, they're thinking about this. And I'll say when Evan transitioned at school, when he was in that in-between stage, it was hard for him, right? And he was only in first grade. But he could always go to the nurse's room and go to the bathroom there and felt safe. And he did have an encounter in a bathroom where he went into the girls' bathroom and one of the girls said, "You're not supposed to be in here."
No.
So that's when he started using the nurse's bathroom. So it is a concern, but I think for it, it's largely overblown.
What was your family's process to get to sharing this book? Because you're the byline, but it really has your family all the way through it.
Yeah.
Including their names and stories. So what was your family's process?
Well, I mean,
Oh,
okay, sorry. What was the process of getting for the family to getting this book published, and how did I engage them in the process? I mean, so they knew I was writing a book. They were supportive. I've asked Evan's permission about things that I've included in the book. There's a family photo rather than doing an author's photo. I wanted to include a family photo in the back. Although I never said their last name. So it is a benefit that I have a different last name from them. So I only use their first names. And we were concerned a little bit about, that just protecting, especially the kids. Evan is not out at school. He's out everywhere else, but At school, he just wants to be a boy and just wants to be accepted as a boy. So there's been a bit of a tension there when I go out and talk about the book. He says, I don't care if people's parents know, but they shouldn't tell their kids. So we're walking that, line and we have been very public about this since before he could really give consent, but I felt like it was so important for especially us as a Christian family, me as clergy, to be very out in public about this, about affirming our kid. And I've always just said to him, I don't want this to be something that you feel ashamed of. I want this, it's not the thing that defines you, but I don't want you to ever feel embarrassed or ashamed that you're a trans person. I want you to always feel proud of that. So we're still living into it. Right.
Rachel, I wonder how you can, or what you would recommend for conversing politically with, let's say, a citizen of Arkansas or some other rural, reddish-leaning state. How do you advance this enlightenment aside from reading and recommending your book?
Yeah. So the question is how to talk to somebody from a more conservative background about this issue. This is why I think it's so important to speak to people parent to parent, right? I think parents want to support their kids, bottom line, no matter what your religion, your culture, your politics, supporting your kids is something that's so important. And so I guess I come at it from that, like trying to relate to people as parents or grandparents, right? And keeping in mind that kids, gender diverse kids who are affirmed by their families and their communities have on balance the same sort of rates of depression, suicide, self-harm as all other teenagers, all other youth. The gender diverse kids who don't have that, suicide rates are around 40%. Self-harming is around 25%. So, they need to understand what's at risk here of not helping these kids. And that doesn't necessarily mean medical transition, right? It means I believe that you know who you are, and I want you to live into your best self, and I want you to thrive, and I support you and I love you, and we're on this journey together. Maria.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the school situation. Because it's not out of school. Have you talked to teachers or does the school system prepare principals, teachers, others to address this issue? That's just, I was going to ask you about bullying first, and you said that it's not out.
Yeah.
This is really more important.
Well, the schools have been amazing. Okay, thank you. Maria asked about schools. What's the school environment like, and how to, what's been our experience with the schools? So, we're so lucky, right, to live in Montgomery County, Maryland, where the school has been totally on our side and supportive. The first person outside of our family that Evan wanted to tell that he wanted to use he, him pronouns was his teacher, his first grade teacher. I just love Miss Hall so much. And she was like, okay, fine, no big deal, right? And then the administration, they had never had a transgender elementary school kid, but they were completely supportive. They didn't really know, though, like how to change his name. And so, the teacher was like, fine, we'll use whatever name you want. But then we realized that like when he had a substitute teacher or he went to a specials class and those teachers didn't know that he was using a different name, then it was an issue. So we had to change it in the system so that when he went to punch in his lunch code, it came up Evan. And it was relatively easy to do, but we had to figure out the process, right? We have not changed his name legally, but we have it all changed in the school system now. So our school's been amazing, and he's at a middle school now. They have a gender sexuality alliance. Evan does not want to participate in it. He's like, no way. But just having that, and statistically, just having a GSA at a school helps LGBTQ kids so much because they know that there's a safe community there, whether they participate in it or not. So, you know, we're very fortunate. And I think there's a struggle though of sometimes kids come out at school and they don't feel safe to come out at home. And then the teachers are having to navigate using a kid's chosen name, preferred pronouns at school, and then not out them to the parents. Or so I think there is a real struggle there. Yeah. Howard.
Several years ago, I heard a lot about a movie that I never saw. And I'm wondering if you saw it, and if you saw it, do you recommend it? The title of the movie is Trans-America.
I have not seen it. Oh, sorry. Howard asked if I'd ever seen the movie Trans-America. I have not. The movie that I do recommend, though, for a lot of people as a starting place is it's a National Geographic film with Katie Couric called The Gender Revolution. And there was an edition of the magazine, and then she did a documentary film that went with it. It's a little over an hour long, used to be on Netflix, but it really covers the whole spectrum of gender diversity. And it talks about transgender and non-binary, intersex, and it's very, and it's in the Katie Couric kind of, you know, very accessible way. I do recommend it. Yeah, Jen.
So we've had a few decades of hope and legislation and things for LGBTQIA people. And then came, you know, who? And I know that I'm straight, I'm single, I don't have children, and I am traumatized when I watch the news. I get frightened when I watch the news lately. What's going on in Florida? What's going on in Texas, in Virginia with our government?
Yeah.
And so I wonder are the kids aware of this going backwards, and how do you deal? I mean, I'm traumatized. How do you deal with their fears of what's happening on a daily basis for them that seems to be backwards now?
Yeah. I mean, I'm also gonna, if Barbara wants to respond to this question too, but if you want to respond to the question is, how do you deal with the trauma of the reactive political environment and the fact that LGBTQ rights are being rolled back? And I mean, I'm an optimistic person, right? And I see what's happening in Arkansas. So now after banning girls participating on transgender girls participating on girls sports teams and outlawing gender affirming care in Arkansas, Utah, Alabama, Tennessee. Gotta get them all. There's like 4 or 5. Texas. Right. So that's really scary. Like the Child Protective Services is going after families who are seeking gender affirming care for their kids. People are having to leave the state of Texas. That is terrifying. But in this legislature in Arkansas, they introduced a bill to ban drag performances. And it's so far reaching that it's basically anybody who dresses in a gender non-conforming way. And it got gutted. And the ACLU is all over Arkansas, and the courts are, you know, so I am hopeful because I do believe that a lot of this is just culture war. It's a lot of making issues out of things that are not an issue. And it's targeting a very vulnerable population because you can, and you can demonize these people. But I also know that my kids' generation, it's not a deal. It's not a deal. They don't care, and they're accepting. And I believe that there's going to be change. There is going to be progress. We're moving in a forward direction. The arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. I believe that. And I believe there are a lot of good people in the fight, and there are a lot of good allies in the fight. And we just got to keep speaking the truth, and we got to keep advocating and being aware.
Some of the most vulnerable populations are trans kids in states. And progressive Northern Virginia, there are lots of kids at our high school who use different pronouns and different names than their parents do at home. It's you know, school is a safe place. So one of the things that you can do for trans kids is you go to the school board and you go to your board of supervisors and you say, public education is really important. And I want my tax dollars to be directed toward our public school system, because it is under attack. And so, you know, like, right here, right now, I'm safe. I don't know what's gonna come out of the Virginia State Legislature. I know my kid is in a safe and supportive school environment, and that we create the most safe place at home. You know, and the rest of it is noise. I hope that's helpful.
Thank
You, Barbara.
Yeah.
We have had a number of comments on, from Zoom, but we have one particular question that I'd like to read. In Texas, is the Methodist Church taking any public actions against the Child Protective Services actions? The place in the Methodist Church.
I don't know. I wish I knew, but maybe Kelly knows.
Not at the conference level, but at the congregation level.
I wouldn't expect it from the conference.
If you would repeat that, please. So people
So the question is, do you want me to repeat the
Go ahead.
question? The question is, what is the Methodist Church in Texas doing to support trans kids and oppose these laws? And I said, I don't know, but Kelly said at the congregational level, there's action.
I can speak to, I don't know the answer to that, but can they hear me?
Jim Daughtry's in Texas, so.
I'm in Texas, but I don't have the answer to that. I think the churches the Methodist churches that I encounter down here are, they're going through the split of the church to the global Methodist church or staying in the current conferences. And that's the discussion point that I hear. I did have a question on this transgender, and I guess going to the future, Rachel, beyond just your children. I'd run for office a few times, but the last time I ran about 10 years ago, I encountered the GLBT community and trying to get their endorsement as a Democrat for office. And they had a set of questions that we're dealing with, should we give transgender people full equality in all ways? And in Houston, where I live, most of the time was going through the bathroom issue down here. And Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, was hot to trot on not allowing transgender people to use the wrong bathroom. And I spoke to that issue to the GLBT group, and they were saying, then I was confronted by one of the transgender men that I know, and he came up and eyeball to eyeball with me, saying, "You mean you're not giving me full equality, Jim?" And I said, I just don't think women in Texas are ready for biologically male men to wander through their bathrooms. And of course, now we've seen more and more bathrooms that have become unisex, which I think is really good. And that's, I think, the way it should go. But coming down to the biological affirming that you mentioned, I guess using that terminology, I know there's some states are for their driver's license are acknowledging a non-gender third other for purposes of male, female, or other on their driver's licenses. And I read about some countries where there are enough sort of the third sex that it seemed like you wouldn't necessarily have to do biological affirming in some of those countries where everything is so common that there's a third gender and everybody's comfortable with that. I've just wondered on the biological affirming in the future and dealing with children, where's the discussion point on that in the community as you're going? And I know you're going through this with children right now, but is that a future you talk about at this point? And how important is it? I don't think it's important for everybody, but I guess it is for some.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolving all the time, right? And first I want to say that biological sex is not the same as gender. So trans women are women, period, end of story. And we, as I'm speaking to the women in the room, we as women need to support trans women And we do not need to be split on there's a thing called radical feminist, trans exclusionary radical feminist, the TERFs. J.K. Rowling is a big spokesperson for the TERFs. And somehow this idea that trans women are threatening to other women and threatening to the feminist movement, and that is bunk. And so we need to stand together, and we need to say that trans women are women. And trans men are men, and non-binary people also count. And so gender is not the same as biological sex. And again, I think this is a made-up issue. I'm grateful that in Maryland, you can put an X on your driver's license if you identify as a non-binary person. You can do that now on your passport. We were able to change Evan's passport so it says male without changing his birth certificate. We just told the State Department that he's male. And so like these things are important because having documentation that aligns with your identity, it matters, it's a protection. And I think it's changing all the time. And I think, you know, it's going to be a whole different world. Libby. Yeah, I mentioned people like a whole bunch.
I think Shelley is here on screen.
Yay, hi Shelley. So Libby's just mentioning her connection with PFLAG, parents and friends of lesbians and gays, is that what it still stands for? But is now inclusive of transgender families and communities. And you know, one of the first support groups that we got connected with was PFLAG in Howard County because they had a teens and tweens group. And that was just an awesome experience for Evan. Through that group, he got to meet one of his heroes, Skylar Baylor, one of my heroes. Skylar was the first out trans NCAA Division I athlete, a swimmer for Harvard. And, you know, for Evan as a young kid and as a swimmer to see another trans boy who was also an athlete was just huge for us. So, yeah.
I want to go back to the school and I'm just curious about, so Evan started school and with one name and had friends. And so then how did he or navigate, or what was the friendship part of it? Now I'm Evan, not this other, not another name.
Yeah.
How did all that work out?
So we told his teacher first, and then his teacher started referring to him with male pronouns. We didn't actually change, I don't know if we changed his name. Can't remember now, in first grade. We did start second grade as Evan. And then in the very first week of second grade, he was at a 4 desks put together, and this girl said, "Didn't you used to be a girl?" And his friend Ella was like, "Evan is a boy, leave it alone." And you know, when the teacher started calling him Evan and using he pronouns, the kids were like, okay. And you know, it happened once in media. There was a girl who asked Evan, and they're just curious, right? But Evan it was hard for him, and he would have a lot of anxiety around the beginning of every school year, and that has lessened. But yeah, I mean, he had teachers, he had friends who spoke up for him, and then in 5th grade, there was a kid who identified as gender fluid, and I mean, he used to say, "Mom, I'm the only kid in my whole school who's transgender," and I was like, maybe, but you know, I understand what you feel very alone. And this child said, "I'm gender fluid," and the other kids said, "What does that mean?" And Evan said, "I think I know what that means." He said, "I think it means some days you wake up and you feel like a boy, and some days you wake up and you feel like a girl, and some days you wake up and you feel like neither." And he said, "Is that what that means?" And the kid said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it." So he's learning how to be an advocate for other kids as well.
How's the medical field dealing with that?
For us, I mean, sorry, how is the medical field dealing with Evan? For us, we have a wonderful pediatrician. He's part of the gender clinic at Children's Hospital. So we're really grateful that Children's National Medical Center has a whole gender clinic. It took us a year to get in there.
Wow.
It's a very long waiting list, but our insurance has covered everything so far. So we have a pediatric endocrinologist that he sees as well. So he's got a whole support team. We're very fortunate. Sandy.
The people you interviewed, were any of them unable to get insurance? And yet support system is like you've been
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Oh, sorry. The people that I interviewed, is it difficult for them to get health insurance or medical resources? And yes, I mean, it's different in different states, unfortunately, and different insurance policies have different policies. The medication that Evan is on now to suppress puberty is a $10,000 a year medication. So I'm really glad that insurance covers it. But yeah, because it's not federal law, because insurance companies can say this is an off-label elective use, that you can be denied for that coverage. So it is a struggle. Right.
Yeah, my name is Brian. I'm a clinical social worker at Fairfax County Community Service for the assessment and referral of kids. Kids walk in generally because they're anxious, they're depressed.
Just speaking of his experience being a clinical social worker in Fairfax County and seeing children who are going through all kinds of mental health issues and identity exploration, and some kids wanting to come to him for support to get gender affirming care without really being assessed. And so I interviewed a couple of psychologists for the book, including the director of transgender health at Johns Hopkins University. And there's the World Association of Transgender Health has protocols for care of gender affirming care. And psychological evaluation is part of that. So this idea that kids are just waking up one day and deciding they're transgender and then wanting to have, they may want that because once a kid acknowledges that, they may have been struggling with that for a long time, and they may want to move really quickly to having an outside that aligns with their inside, right? And that's one of the struggles, I think, for parents, for caregivers to help that child make that decision in a way that's really allows them to figure out who they are and support them without rushing to make changes that are permanent and irreversible. There is can be a loss of fertility with these cross hormones, with taking puberty suppressant drugs. So there is a risk. The psychologist at Children's, when we took Evan there, assessed him. It was a 2-day assessment, just initial assessment. And at the end, she said to him, Evan, and I know you understand yourself to be a boy, but someday you may decide that you're a girl or neither. And I was like, what the hell? And Evan, I was like, and Evan leaves the room, and I was like, okay, you got to help me understand. I don't understand what we have worked so hard to support him, and everyone said we should support him, and now he's made this transition, and you're telling him he can be a girl again. And she said, look, he's 8 years old, and he's got a lot of growing to do, and he will figure out who he is in the world. And you are doing the right thing supporting him, but you have to hold this lightly. And that was a real wake-up call for me, that this was, again, I thought I was so sure. And he's been consistent. But it's hard for parents. We want to settle into some assurance that our kid's going to be okay. And so just helping them along the way. Kelly.
Very quick.
Wait,
I'm
Kelly.
sorry.
It's like a delicate one to walk, but I feel like it's important for them to know. It's like, one, they can feel sure of who they are now and we can affirm that, but also it's okay if things change and grow, that identities are complicated and fluid. Because one, that's something that I wish I had been, because I would have come out as queer much younger if I'd known there wasn't a very simple line box to figure it out. Yeah, and there's like things like that, but I think also part of it too, that I think is part, and I was talking about this in a program with other colleagues, again, is that this younger generation, this generation of kids, their concepts of gender and identity is much more fluid in general, and I think that is something that is hard for us who did not grow up with that to understand. And so I'm constantly trying to reach that.
Question about it.
Do you want me to repeat what Kelly
Can you try briefly?
So Kelly just, as a middle school teacher and someone who is also part of the LGBTQ community, Kelly just affirms that the kids affirming who they are now, and also the space to continue to explore their identity and figure out who they are, that's would have helped her and is the way to be supportive of our kids now.
Last question.
Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah, Rachel, you're looking, of course, at a loving community that loves heaven. What is the best way we can express that, or best way we can affirm and support him?
Thank you. Yeah, so the question is, how can you all affirm Evan? And you already have, of course, he's a boy. And he's an amazing kid. And the fact that he's transgender is it's just one piece of who he is. And it's not even for him, it's not even the thing that's like the most important thing. So just, get to know him and keep loving him. And thank you for loving our family.